Hey guys, real quick, I just want to show you and also recommend a couple or a few great Beatle books out there if you're trying to learn more about the Beatles and in regards to their music and their instruments and their popularity and basically everything else about the Fab Four. We'll start with this one real quick. This is the Beatles Gear, which is an old-time favorite book. All the Fab Four's instruments from stage to studio throughout their whole career, written by this guy, Andy. Basically, this book is all about the gear they use, all about their guitars, their pedals, their amplifiers, their endorsements, their drums, their microphones, the studio they used, or the studios they used more than one, and it's basically a Beatles geek book when it comes to learning more about the gear they use for doing their recordings, again, from stage to studio, or studio to stage, early years all the way to the end. I'm going to go through it real quick. I got a couple cool stuff in here. This page is a really cool ad about Premier drums. This is the white Premier kit that Pete Best used during the early Beatle years up until 1961, 62, late 50s maybe. Some amplifiers here. A Walkins Westminster amp that looks like Stu used with his bass. I'm guessing it's a bass amp. I don't know too much about them. There's John Lennon's first Rickenbacker 325 in the original natural wood color before he painted it with the looks like a Bigsby looking tremolo arm on there. Right here is George Harrison's Gretsch Duo Jet, used on the early Beatle recordings, like especially on the Please Please Me album. I believe this was his main guitar on that album. It looks like it had a Bigsby tremolo arm on it. Lennon with the Rickenbacker 325 before painted black. Good picture of Pete Best with his white Premier kit, white Marine Pearl Premier kit, and Paul McCartney with his first Hofner bass. Looks like it has like two pickups here. His later model, his main model, only had two. This was the one he used, I think, on the Please Please Me album, and even before that, prior to that. Right here is a picture of Paul McCartney's or a replica of Paul McCartney's coffin bass rig, his coffin cabinet. There's a picture of some cream white 1962, 63 fawn colored Vox AC30 amps. These are seen in the Please Please Me album session pictures. Ringo Starr's Premier kit, and the Duroplastic root beer brown color finish with that piccolo looking snare. Zinc cymbals. There's an ad for it. It was a combination of a 54 and a 58 Premier kit, which are some parts were from 1954, some were from 58. There's the famous Gibson J160E that John Lennon and George Harrison used on the early Beatle recordings for the acoustic guitars that you hear, that they are together. They both played identical twin J160Es. Right here is Ringo Starr's second Black Oyster Pearl 20-inch bass drum kit. Used on like With the Beatles and Meet the Beatles and maybe even Hard Day's Night. Early year touring. There's a Vox amplifier ad the Beatles were promoting. This is the tom and snare drum on Ringo's first Black Oyster Pearl Ludwig 20-inch bass drum kit. There's a picture of his second Black Oyster Pearl Ludwig 20-inch bass drum kit from behind. Looks like he used a Speed King, which is what I use. George Harrison's famous Country Gentleman. The Chet Atkins Country Gentleman by Gretsch. He acquired in 63, 62 somehow. There's an ad for Gretsch guitars featuring George Harrison. George Harrison actually had two of these. One of them he borrowed. I think one was his. There's a guitar George Harrison had during the 1963 tour in the U.S. I think it was the U.S. Or visiting the U.S. He bought this guitar. That's what it was. Visiting family. He bought this guitar on his way to the U.S. to visit his sister, I believe. This is a Rickenbacker 425 6-string. There he is, seen there. Here's Paul McCartney's main 4-string Hofner bass guitar. As you can see, this was his second one with the 2 pickups. His first one with the 3 pickups was retired because it was wearing and was showing a lot of road worn, and he had to retire it. And this bass guitar, this Hofner bass, became his main bass amp throughout the early Beatle years up until maybe even the late Beatle years. Still owns it today, still plays it today. No longer has a pick guard, and he has the set list from his 1966 tour still on the body here. There's George Harrison's 1963 Rickenbacker 360 12-string electric guitar. Used on the second album, Hard Day's Night, touring. I think he used it at Shea Stadium. Famous Beatles drop T logo head. Used at the Ed Sullivan Show, 1964-ish. American appearance. And here is John Lennon's second Rickenbacker 325 that he acquired in 1964, which was already in black. As you can see, a different tremolo arm on here. Beatles gear. Another classic book. Beatles recordings, complete recording sessions. Shows you from Please Please Me, maybe even a little bit before Please Please Me, all the way through Let It Be, every recording session. Dates, time, where they're at recording it, how many takes, what time in the day they did it, what time they did every overdub. This is awesome. Every detail of every recording. Look, it's literally like a journal. Monday 31st of October on Halloween, Monday November 7th, Tuesday November 8th. They did this, Beatles did that, overdubbed that. Shows you everything, every little ounce of detail in the studio. There they are recording some stuff for Hard Day's Night. July 10th, Friday. These guys worked till like 3 in the morning recording stuff, trying to get a record done. Working with George Martin. And here's the Beatles Bible, the anthology. Which is everything, every photo, every piece of information imaginable about the Beatles in this black book. Very thick. Also with this book are the 3 anthology CDs that you have to get with the book. These, volume 1, 2, and 3. Check them out. Check them out. And for all the Beatle guitar stuff that I did on the early Beatle years, guitar recordings, improvisations, this is the book I used. It is the Beatles Capitol Albums Volume 1, Capitol Records, the recorded guitar versions, the authentic transcriptions with notes and tablature. Volume 1. I also have Volume 2. Sheet music and guitar tabs. That's the book where I've been learning all the Beatles stuff from. Check them out, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 and Volume 2, they only have all the songs from the early years. Please Please Me up to, like, I believe, Rubber Soul. It does not have anything from Revolver and up, if I'm not mistaken. So that's it. Again, thank you very much. One last thing I forgot to add in my guitar demo video is that a couple tracks I did some bass lines, some of Paul's bass lines. I was actually using a Digitech whammy pedal on the octave down setting, which created a bass guitar sound. And then I used the strings 4, 5, and 6, which are the bass strings, to mimic Paul McCartney's Hofner bass sound. And if you want to see a good example of that, check out the Beatles song, if I remember. Honestly, I forget, but there were a couple Hofner, Paul McCartney bass lines I did. And to accomplish that sound, I just used the Digitech whammy pedal on the octave down setting, using the bass strings on the electric guitar, 6-string electric, to mimic that sound. I also used it for some of the 12-string effects too. I used the Boss PS6 Harmonist pedal and the Digitech whammy pedal for the 12-string sounds and the octave down bass lines that were Paul McCartney's. And that's it. Again, thank you very much. I forgot to add this stuff in the last video. I kind of crunched it in. Rock on. Thank you very much. More videos on the way.